Atomic bomb, atomic war ended, and Germany, Japan refriended. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA. We are Duncanville High School in these United States, and today is February 26, 2021. And on this date in history, in 1993, Al Qaeda bombed the World Trade Center. Now, this happened twice. You're more familiar with what happened on 9/11, but it also happened 8 years earlier. They put a large truck in with explosives and it blew out a massive hole in the parking garage. We didn't find out until later that, the structural damage that it did. Anyway, didn't really matter whenever the building went down several years later, just how much damage to the foundation there was. They fixed it with the new building. Well, when you start the day with a very, very horrible thing, well, that's what we're doing today. Now, the Japanese forces are some of the most ferocious that the U.S. will ever fight in their history. Most of them were willing to fight to the very last man, and at the very least, they were willing, even the civilians were willing to do the same thing, and it's because of stories that they were told about Americans. For instance, the story was when the Americans come in, once they defeat you, they will murder and rape you. And the Japanese believe this, and a lot of this is because of what happens here at Nanking. Okay? And what's the rape of Nanking? So, between December of 1937 and March of 1938, so a little bit over 3 months, the Japanese will kill 369,366 Chinese civilians and prisoners of war. Again, you think about just how many people they're killing, and not only do you kill them, you're also disposing of the bodies. The Japanese saw themselves as a master race, and how do you make more of the master race? Well, they raped 80,000 women and young girls to create more Japanese people. Many of the people that survived were mutilated or murdered. On the left-hand side, you see two pictures that go together, where they had a contest to see who could decapitate the most men in, I think it was 90 seconds. And you see all the heads stacked over on the middle picture on the left, and the bottom you see a Japanese soldier holding someone's head with a big smile on his face. On the top right-hand side, you see some training going on, where if you've ever watched a movie with people training for war, you'll see them with the bayonet on the end of the gun and a sandbag being swung towards them, where they go up and they'll throw the butt of the gun into the sandbag and then go back and stab the sandbag. Well, in this case, what they're doing is they just do this to Chinese people. And they practice this over and over again. On the bottom right-hand side, you can see several different Chinese civilians being buried alive, just to see what it's like. And you look at all the men that are standing around watching this being done. This cruelty, which was talked about back home as a way of, look what we did to make the world a better place, makes it so that they will believe anything when they hear what U.S. forces are doing to the Japanese. This is Chiang Kai-shek. This is a man who will be an ally of the United States for the rest of his life. He's the leader of China. And even after the communists take over China, one of his right-hand men, Mao Zedong, does that. We will continue to support him as, he is the leader of Taiwan following... anyway, so he leads Chinese forces against the Japanese, and he has the full support of the U.S. The Battle of Leyte Gulf is the largest naval battle in history. Okay? So every other naval battle before and after this is larger than that. This is also the first time that the Japanese used kamikaze attacks. And what the kamikazes did is they would deliberately crash their planes into U.S. ships, killing themselves and damaging the ships. Now, most of the time whenever this is talked about, people talk about how insane they are for doing this. Yet,
one of the weird things is in American movies, this kind of heroism is always praised. You know, the man who, oh no, everyone's going to die, and then the guy flies his ship into it and blows it up, or the man that stands behind with the bomb and I'll hold him off until all of you get to safety, and you tear up as you know that he's going to die, and you see that happen. A tear rolls down your face, and you hear the explosion. But when we talk about other people from other countries doing it, they're insane. I don't know. I find this to be a really weird double standard. But this is one of the largest attacks, and again, this is a battle that the Americans win, but they pay a lot of price. They pay a high price for it in lives, and but this makes it easier for them to make it that much closer to Japan. Now, the Tokyo was a hard target for us to get to, and there's several people that are still furious about what happened in Hawaii. So we decide we're going to take out the city. So we dropped bombs over Tokyo. We killed over 83,000 people with these bombs. A lot of them were with napalm, and that's a jelly gasoline that explodes on contact and burns until it's completely extinguished. 250,000 buildings were destroyed. That's the face of revenge. Now, island hopping. I told you how ferociously that all the Japanese were at holding their positions. Well, we realized early in the war what we could do is go around some of the more heavily defended islands and just get close to the important islands that we needed to take Japan. So island hopping is moving around fortified islands to get to Japan and reducing the number of American deaths. Now, the Japanese fought so ferociously that once the war was over, several Japanese men held their positions, not believing that the war was over. One of the people that took this to the extreme was a man by the name of Hiro Noto. Hiro Noto was on a isolated island. He was there with a team of 10 men, and they were told to hold it until all of their forces were dead, or U.S. forces were dead. So, over the next 25 years after the war is over, Hiro Noto continues to patrol his island and protect it from American advancing troops and British advancing troops and Chinese advancing troops. Someone found him on the island 27 years after the war was over in 1972. Hiro did not believe that the war was over, so they went back to Japan. They actually found his commanding officer, who went there in uniform to bring Hiro back. And Hiro comes back really treated like a conquering hero and a symbol of dedication and following of orders. Okay, Iwo Jima. Now, this is one of the islands closest to Japan. For us to do any major assault or invade the mainland of Japan, you had to take this first. So 6,000 U.S. Marines landed on Iwo Jima. This is an island very close to Japan. And whenever they land, they don't find any Japanese forces. They think, wow, this is easy. They raise a flag up at the top of Mount Suribachi. And this picture of the flag is put in American newspapers, and the men who raised it are brought home to the States to sell victory bonds to help pay for the war. In fact, they actually have to take a second shot because they couldn't clearly get everything in the first shot. So the men in the second shot are actually the ones that get to go back. So 60,000 U.S. Marines are on Iwo Jima. Then in the middle of the night, the Japanese who had been on the island fortifying it for the last almost year, they come popping out of holes everywhere, attacking U.S. troops. 4,000 Marines will lose their life taking the island. And the Japanese soldiers that were fighting it, they fought to the very last man. Many of them went and surrendered to U.S. forces with a grenade in their hand to take out themselves and any of the people they were surrendering to. Again, this was believing that the Americans, once they won, were going to murder and rape their families. And they were told all men, women, children, no one is safe from the lust and the murder of U.S. forces. So, if you've ever seen the movie Letters from Iwo Jima, one of the last things that happens, there's around 30 Japanese troops that survive, and the lieutenant in charge orders all of them to grab a grenade, put it under their chin, pull the pin, and blow their brains out. That's kind of how everything ended for them. This is something that was discovered after the war was over. Actually, in 1990, some people were in Iwo Jima. They found one of the underground tunnels, and they found hundreds and hundreds of letters written by the troops in Iwo Jima that were finally delivered to their families, and hearing about their last moments before they had to kill themselves. Okinawa was another very bloody battlefield. There were 300,000 Japanese civilians that were on the island, and around 70,000 Japanese troops. Less than 2,000 Japanese troops were captured alive. The rest of them fought to the death, and it's going to lead to the deaths of 50,000 U.S. troops, making this the bloodiest battlefield for Americans in World War II. So, but on the other hand, Okinawa was close enough that our planes could take off and bomb Japan proper, and that includes Okinawa. I mean, not Okinawa. That includes Tokyo. So, we're now in place, and we can do our worst to Japan. So at the Potsdam conference, okay, Potsdam is this beautiful little town right outside of Berlin. My wife and I stayed there about 10 years ago. It's quite beautiful. Anyway, so there, Harry Truman, the new president of the United States, Joseph Stalin, and the new British Prime Minister, Clement Attlee, they get together and they agree to several things at the end of the war. Okay, so it's 2 months after Hitler has killed himself. So they want to hold war crimes trials for all the Nazis that had anything to do with the Holocaust or the war. Stalin wanted heavy reparations from Germany, which is one of the things that led to World War II in the first place. Truman told him no, and then told him about the atomic bomb. Imagine that you said, "Hey, Mr. Dugdale, can I turn in this paper late?" And I say no, and I have a gun. This is what you call a threat. And this is what we provided to the Soviet Union. And believe it or not, relationships between the U.S. and the Soviet Union started to sour after this moment in U.S. history. Now, I'm going back in time because FDR is dead. But before he died, Albert Einstein wrote a letter to FDR, said that it is possible to take uranium and start a chain reaction in a bomb and create a bomb big enough to blow up a port or a city. And as a result, FDR started the Manhattan Project. And the Manhattan Project is the secret project to create the atomic bomb. Einstein refuses to work on this program, but there were several scientists who were willing. So the Manhattan Project, this is started under General Groves. He is the military leader in charge of the base. And Robert Oppenheimer is the lead scientist. In the creation of the atomic bomb, which is worked on in New Mexico, they employed 130,000 people and were able to keep this a secret. It also cost over $2 billion to make. After working on this for a couple of years, they were finally able to create the bomb, and when they were about to test it, about half the scientists thought that the chain reaction could be something that couldn't be contained and it could destroy the universe. But they didn't talk about it any longer than that, and they ended up setting it off. And luckily for them, it did not kill everyone on Earth or the universe. Okay, so they set it off. They only had 3 bombs, though, and this could be a problem. So, anyway, here we go. This is the USS Indianapolis. This delivered the first atomic bomb to Okinawa, and it was sunk the following day. I'd love to include this. This won't be on the test in any way, but this is a reference to one of my favorite movies ever made, and that movie is Jaws. And if you've seen Jaws, you'll know that Quint at one point talks about being on the Indianapolis. And he talks about delivering the first atomic bomb. And so what happens is the ship sinks. There's 1,200 crew on whenever it sinks, but afterwards there's 900 people that survive. And because they were on such a top secret mission to deliver the atomic bomb, no one knew that they were gone for 3 days. And so no one was expecting them back at any time soon. So they were in the water for 4 days, and during that 4-day period, sharks took the lives of 600 men. And that will inspire one of the greatest movies ever made, and that is Jaws. And I guess it also inspired Jaws 4, which is not as good. But Jaws is a great movie. If you don't know, then you might be stupid. Sorry, that may be uncalled for. Let me give you the first atomic bombs that were dropped. Well, the first and second and only bombs ever dropped on a population. The top one is called Fat Man. Okay, Fat Man is a bomb that is made out of plutonium. Okay, this is the one that is actually going to be dropped on Nagasaki. It's the second atomic bomb that we drop. The bomb on the bottom is Little Boy. It's made of uranium, and it actually takes a lot more lives. So these bombs are dropped on civilian targets, and for the safety of the crew and to make sure that they go off, they blow them up about 2,000 feet above the ground, so that instead of blowing it up on the ground where it does just damage in that area there, by setting it off at a higher altitude, the force of the bomb will go and crush a much larger area than if it lands on the ground and blows up. Hiroshima. The fateful day was August 6, 1945. Paul Tibbets, the man in charge of the mission and flying the plane was named Enola Gay. That was his mother's name. They dropped Little Boy, and it went off 2,000 feet over Hiroshima. The explosion was as powerful as 13 kilotons of dynamite. 70,000 people died in the instant blast that happened, and another 295,325 people died afterwards. Now on the top left-hand side, you can see what's left of the city after the bomb. You can see the bomb blast on the right-hand side, but what they did is they took aerial pictures before and after. The middle one shows what the city looked like just a few hours beforehand, and the one underneath it showed what was left afterwards. A complete and total devastation. So the Japanese were given warnings a few days in advance this was going to happen. They let the bomb hit, and so for the next day and a half, they're trying to get word from the Japanese. Is this going to be over, or do we have to drop one of these every 3 days until there's nothing left of Japan? They didn't answer, so once again, the U.S. will be prepared to drop another atomic bomb. Nagasaki was one of the largest seaports in the in Japan. One of the largest seaports and one of the largest industrial centers. They made a lot of weapons and supplies there. Major Sweeney is going to drop Fat Man, which is the bigger of the two bombs, but it doesn't kill as many people. Still ferocious and horrible. 40,000 people die instantly. Another 165,409 people will die in the immediate aftermath. If you look up in the top left-hand side, you can see kind of the same image that you see in the picture right below and see where ground zero is, and it destroys everything in that area. Even though this is a bigger bomb, what actually helped prevent more devastation was the fact that it was up in the mountains. Japan was given more time at this point before we threatened to drop another atomic bomb, which we did not have. It would be months before we had another atomic bomb, and then we had enough to drop one every 3 days for about 100 days by the end of 1945. Victory in Japan was on August 15th, 1945. Japan surrendered. The only condition that they wanted in their surrender was that the emperor would not be tried or arrested for war crimes. Other than that, the war was over, and they officially signed the documents on the USS Missouri on September 2nd, 1945, ending the war. Before the war was over, they knew that something had to be done to prevent this from happening again. And they tried to create this back following World War One, and that is the United Nations. So this is kind of like the League of Nations, but it's actually going to have some teeth to it, and it's still around today. So it was built with a little bit more care than the League of Nations was. This is an international political organization that was created to prevent war. The UN had a General Assembly where every nation in the world will have a vote that wants to be part of the United Nations. It's based in New York, so every country in the world is going to have some embassy in New York for their delegates to be, whether it's a single room or a building or, depending on the country, a much larger area. Britain, France, China, the Soviet Union, and the U.S. all have veto power, and we're in charge of the Security Council. And when need be, they can mobilize forces from all these different countries to try and keep the peace and prevent any future wars. Now, to try and, as an extra incentive against war, they create what's called the International Military Tribunal. And the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union punish German and Japanese leaders for war crimes. They put them on trial. They have to prove that they're guilty, and if so, then they can receive penalties from execution to life in prison to, sentences depending on what they did. At Nuremberg, which is where a lot of the problems started, that's where they held the war trials for the German war criminals. They tried Nazis for crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. 12 of the 22 were executed by hanging. If you look in the picture on the top left-hand side, the guy that's sitting down leaning on his hand, that is Hermann Göring, the highest-ranking officer after the war. On the back row there is Karl Dönitz, who was in charge of Germany after the war. He actually will survive. Göring, who's leaning there, he's sentenced to die, but instead of being hung, he takes cyanide and dies. Down on the bottom left-hand side were the Japanese war trials. They were held in Tokyo by the International Military Tribunal. The Japanese emperor was not charged as, made in the peace talks. Hideki Tojo was, however, he was the guy that kind of led the whole war effort. And while a lot's said about the Holocaust in Japan, the Japanese actually killed more Chinese civilians during the war than the Germans did Jews, Russians, Poles, and anyway, so, not that there's any contest, but a lot of atrocities. Of the major powers, the U.S. really had the fewest casualties. For the British, they had a lot of civilian dead, which added to their number, and so did the Italians. The war cost $330 billion more than all the other wars fought in U.S. history combined. And the national debt's going to quintuple as a result of the war. But it does end this fight. Okay? And it also ends this unit. So I hope everyone made it through. We have 2 major wars to talk about and a lot of depression. So this brings us to the end of this unit. Please be prepared. We have a test coming up. Don't cocaine, don't AIDS, and please don't COVID. I'll see y'all soon. Have a great day. This is Doug Dell, and I'm out.